Okay, change the host now to Russ. Thanks, Russ. You can start an introduction, and John and I will just go and we'll continue on.
Sure. My name is Russ Hilbert. I'm the Kandiyohi County AIS coordinator.
John Morales with the Middle Fork Crow River Watershed District. I'm the program manager.
And my name's Andy Johnson with the Crow River Watershed District, Middle Fork River Watershed District, and I am the project manager. And we'll just go back to Russ. And thanks everybody else in the Diamond Lake Association for joining on tonight. Like I say, if this recording goes through, we'll put it on our Watershed District's YouTube page and out for viewing later on.
Let's see. So there we go. All right. Well, thanks for having me. Just to give a quick synopsis of the Kandiyohi County AIS program. Like I said, I'm Russ Hilbert. I'm the coordinator. This is a list of our infested lakes currently. They've kind of been the same for the last few years. Nothing new has come about in the last couple of years, thankfully. So Diamond Lake currently still just infested with zebra mussels at the moment. I run the inspection program, and in 2020 we had 20 inspectors working, and we inspected 12 lakes, 19 accesses, little under 7,000 hours that we worked, and a little over 10,000 inspections performed by our staff. And of those hours or inspections worked, a little over 6,500 were on entering watercraft, and 144 violations were found. And 130 watercraft had watercraft plugs still in, so a little under 2% of watercraft arrive with the drain plug still in. So it's pretty valuable for us to still be out there and doing inspections as much as we can. Primarily, we focus on just the 10 busiest accesses, like your Green Lakes and your Diamond West and East and your Norway South. We kind of try to stick to the busiest ones. We were planning 20 to 24 people this year. That didn't happen, unfortunately. We ended up with a grand total of 16 this year. It was just could not get enough applicants to hire this year. So the ones we have are who we have, and I'm losing a couple here at the end of July, and actually about 3 of them by early August. So it's tough for us to staff. A lot of the accesses roll often. We'll run our season this year through the September 15th as well. This is just kind of a graphic of the inspections per hour. Just to kind of give you a visual of where it was busy last year. That always changes year to year. Just kind of depends on when you can get somebody to staff a certain spot or not. If you can hit the busiest times of the day or busiest times of the week, then you can kind of increase that inspection rate. Our goal is try to hit the peak activity for boater hours. So usually that evenings and weekends if we can. We always have to offer some middle of the week hours with our decon unit. So we always have some other hours as well. So on the decontamination side, in 2020 we did 183. We did 140 in 2019 with two units. In 2020 only had the 1 unit, so that we did a little bit better in 2020. 2021 we were planning to have 2 units. However, with only 16 staff, we weren't able to run both of them, so we were just stuck using the one at Salisbury Beach this year. We had pretty limited staff that we were able to train in 2020, just because of the pandemic. There was no in-person training, so we just were able to do a refresher on the returning inspectors. We were going to rotate that around, and the Diamond West access was going to be a spot we could put our 2nd unit this year, but just didn't happen this year with the limited staff. would have been there, I think probably the month of July for this year. And so we'll try that again next year, see if we can get enough staff next year to try that. So in order to, for a watercraft to be decontaminated, it'll need a 140-degree rinse with water for just 10 seconds to kill all the aquatic invasive species. If you have some that are stuck on, the high pressure nozzle can be used to remove that. And just as a reminder for all the lake residents of the 21-day dry rule, any lifts, rafts, docks, or other water-related equipment that's been in one body of water can't be placed in another water body until a minimum of 21 days out of the water has passed. And that's even if decontamination has happened, that doesn't shorten that time frame at all. Part of a program, we use what's called SENTRY units at some of the lake accesses. We have a total of 10 of them. They're the little cameras and audio messages that play at some of the accesses. You might see them at Lake County Park 5, Norway South, George Lake. Those have one. There's a few other lakes. I think Ness Lake has one. In 2020, they found a total of 3 potential violations and haven't found more than 4 in any previous year. And to my knowledge, no citations have been issued based on those potential violations. I think primarily just warnings. As of now, they've been unable to catch any potential zebra mussels or veligers unless they're pointed out by staff or via complaint. So the effectiveness of them is a bit limited, I feel. So for 2021, out of the 10 SENTRY units that we have, the lake associations were willing to pay 50% of the operational expense on those. So it did lower our costs significantly out of our limited funds. The other part of our program is the local grants program. So for 2020, there was over 97,000 requested in grants, and we awarded over 48,000 to 9 lake associations and 2 educational programs. For 2021, we awarded, or it was a little over 98,000 that was requested in grant funds. Those awards were announced in January 21. And the Diamond Lake request for 2021 was 25,000 for a matching funds for a treatment of curly leaf pondweed. The AIS task force approved $10,000 in matching funds for that treatment for 2021. Part of our public education and awareness program, we do some gas station advertising. So there's some pump toppers and ice boxes that we use to advertise our decon hotline and the locations of our decon units. And then we also have radio ads that run 3 ads a day on 2 different radio stations, on KWLM stations. And those ads advertise primarily the locations of the decon units. And then there was also 2 educational ads that we rotated in that 3rd slot 25% of the time, just to kind of try to raise awareness of some of the effects of the invasive species, what potential adverse effects there can be, just to try to educate the general public so that they don't, a lot of times you hear that zebra mussels are good because they clean the lake, and that's yes, the lake is clear, but that's not necessarily a good thing because it creates an algae bloom because of the excess weed growth. So just to try to increase awareness of what the bad effects are of some of those invasive species. We also utilize the Wilmer Community Access Channel. We run free public service announcements with hours and locations of the decon units. So it's pretty good value being that it's free. So. And then we also do some education to school-age children in the 7th grades in New London, Spicer, and Wilmer. In 2020, we reached 425 students with a curriculum-based program. However, due to restrictions, they weren't allowed access in the Wilmer school this year, unfortunately. So we just reached the New London school. The person we have doing the education, his name is Randy Fredrickson. He's a former teacher for Wilmer. So he put together a curriculum-based program, and he does the delivery for us. So we've been pretty happy with what he's done so far. There are some areas where we can improve the use of the decontamination units, primarily through our inspection staff promoting the decontamination and recommending decontaminations when the DNR data supports it, such as if there's water present in ballast tanks, or if there's, in the bilge area, even if you drain it, it's still, there's recommended times where you'd want to do those decons, and they aren't necessarily required, but you're still just recommended. So just try to get the public on board with just taking a few minutes out of their time to do that, and then just doing all the required decontaminations. If somebody asks for one, just do it. Don't say it's not required, so you don't need to. We just do it. We never want to turn anybody away from decon units. So I think our staff's been doing pretty good this year, from what I understand. I know we've bought quite a bit of fuel already, so I know it's being used, and I've seen it in action out there. So I've been pretty pleased with my staff trying to promote it for us. So another area we can improve on is the inspection rate per hour. So in 2021, we did more of the 4-hour shifts, 4 to 5 hours, just to try to match that peak boater activity, whether it be in the morning, try to catch the fishermen in the mornings, or in the evenings when you have more of the pleasure boaters and some fishermen then too, and then on mainly on weekends too. With limited staff this year, it's been tough to get more weekend shift availability without requiring people to work double shifts, and that's something we can't really do. So with our limited staff, a lot of them, the great majority, have been working weekends. So they like their weekends off every now and then too. So it's really tough to get more hours on the weekends than what we already have. We have some future ideas we might try to take advantage of in the next couple of years. One idea is a watercraft cleaning station, just kind of a mobile unit with a like a grabber or a brush that boaters can use just to kind of clean their boats off. Have kind of a design for a prototype, but we haven't built anything yet. So we'll just kind of try to keep working on that and see if we can't get something mocked up and try it out on a lake and see how it works. Another idea we had is possibly an online lake check-in and check-out feature. That'll be tough to do, being that some accesses, actually most access, don't really have internet. If people want to use their data, that may still work out. It's nothing that will ever make a mandatory thing, but it's something I'll have to get our IT staff to create a prototype for us and see if we can't get something available that functions reasonably well. Some other ideas we have is some community access channel programming. I have some AIS videos that we could possibly run, and we could possibly create just a short video on how to inspect and clean your boat, and then maybe on decontamination too, just to try to educate the public as much as possible. So I'll go through some quick AIS identification. I think most of you are pretty able to identify zebra mussels since you have those in Diamond Lake already. So we'll skip that one. We'll go right to the Eurasian water milfoil. Quick way to identify that is the numbers of leaflet pairs. There's 12 to 20 leaflet pairs on a Eurasian water milfoil, whereas on a native or northern milfoil, they only have 5 to 10 pair. And then if you take them out of the water, those leaves are limp. So that's kind of the quick and easy way to identify that. Starry stonewort is kind of the big one that I think most people are really worried about lately. That looks pretty close to a lot of native species like your native cara and muskgrass. For the starry stonewort, the branchlets are in whorls of 5 to 8. and they're forked branchlets with one branch that's a little bit longer than the other. And then typically in late August and September, there'll be star-shaped bulbils at the base of the plant. That's why we tend to do the starry trek with the U of M in late August to try to look for that at the accesses. Curly leaf pondweed, I'm sure you're very familiar with as well, since I think you guys are treating that this year. A quick way to identify that is that the wavy edges on the leaves are serrated, so you have to look real close and you'll see it's like a serrated knife almost. Some of the lookalikes that are native are like a clasping pondweed, and on those where the leaf attaches to the stem, it actually clasps all the way around. You'll see that ring all the way around the stem, whereas on the curly leaf you won't. Spiny water flea, that's something that's in Mille Lacs and I think a few other lakes too. I think maybe Winnebagosh. They're 1/4 to 5/8 of an inch long with a long spiny tail with 1 to 4 barbs. They have a little black eye spot. So, and then Chinese mystery snail, I believe that's actually in Diamond Lake, but it's not treated the same as like a zebra mussel or spiny water flea because it doesn't interrupt the food chain that I'm aware of. I think one's been found there, and I think I was on Ness Lake. I found one last year. They're up to 2 inches long, just a light to dark brown, and their little trapdoor covering is often missing when it's dead. So this kind of a quick way to identify those. The DNR doesn't treat it the same as a zebra mussel or anything, just because it doesn't impact the food chain like those others do. That's all I have. If you have any questions.
I'm not sure about questions coming in. If someone has one for Russ real quick before he bails out, otherwise, John and I will be available for questions afterwards. So.
This is Eric Holman. I'm on the AIS committee for Diamond Lake Association, and I just want to give kudos and a shout out to Russ. 2020 was a very unusual year, and everybody was in lockdown when things were real critical in our AIS treatment process, and he just went above and beyond what he needed to do. And Russ, I really appreciate all of the help that you gave us last year.
Thank you.
If I could bring up a couple different items, since this is a Diamond Lake specific meeting, I'm assuming that people that are on board are either on the board or are highly interested in the AIS program that we have going. I guess I would like to offer to Russ that we have gotten quite a bit of feedback from some of the lakeshore owners that they're interested in helping to fight or manage invasive species in the lake. And I guess I understand that you're short on staff to work for you, and was wondering if you would consider possibly starting a volunteer program to where residents that want to be involved in trying to manage the problem would receive training from you or from experts, other experts, on how to man some of the stations where your normal paid staff would work. I guess I might be speaking a little bit out of school here, and out of, I don't have the juice to make this claim, but I believe that we can find volunteers around the lake that are not Rambo types, that are, that are have the right temperament to man those stations, to where we would be able to donate time to basically help pay back the grant that you give us each year. I mean, $10,000 is a difference maker for us. It may not be a big deal in the entire county budget, but it's a big deal to us, and we deeply appreciate it. And I think that we're willing to put our backs into it, and I think you can get some volunteer time, at least 50-50 to cover the grants. So I guess I'm asking that if you would consider doing something like that.
There is a program, I think it's called the AIS Ambassador Program, that's available, and I can send you some of that info and see what you think. And basically, kind of the synopsis of it is that you're not really doing inspections, but you're out there to promote inspecting your own boat and cleaning your boat and just talking to people, and that's really it. Just trying to get them to do the right thing, basically. So we could certainly see if we can get you guys started on that.
I think that would be very helpful. I did, when I put in my boat last year, I didn't see him this year, but last year, the inspector that you had out there was really good. She didn't act like a cop. She as an enforcer cop, she acted like a cop that was trying to improve the neighborhood. And that ambassador program sounds like a great deal. Sounds like we could get some traction. A couple other things that I'd like to bring up is that AIS video. If we could use that, I guess we would sure put a link to that on our website. As you know, this year we're well, you may not know it yet, but the water district is going to be coming to the county in a few days, and we're going to be looking to ask for a $60,000 assessment of landowners. And so I guess I think that indicates that people around the lake really are committed to the battle. Another thing that I just jotted down while you were giving your presentation is I personally am scared to death of stoning. Is there anything that our association could do to help the Coronas Association in the decontamination deal? Because that's where it's going to come from. If Diamond ends up with Stony, we're going to be probably blaming Coronas for it, right or wrong. And so if we can do something more proactive to help them with their decontamination process, I think it would be good for us.
Yeah, other than, I think, monetary contributions, I'm not sure off the top of my head how you'd be able to help them, but I know they spend a large amount of funds treating their infestation. They cut it at the access, and then they treat it a couple of times a year in certain areas. And I don't know if they're really making a lot of progress on it, but I know we've donated money to them. There was an agreement that was made prior to me starting, so we kind of made good on that agreement and donated some funds to them for their fight as well.
That's great. I will tell you, I got a comment on the Chinese snails. I looked them up on the internet, and I think that we have both Chinese and Japanese snails in Diamond Lake, and there's quite a few of them because my grandkids love to collect them. And when you bring them up and they're still alive, they stink to high heaven when they're drying out. It's crazy.
Russ,
Well,
this is Tim
maybe there'll be a
Grossman.
time someone will give a recipe with some butter and scallions and they can be in a dish somewhere. Who knows? I would like to keep giving all the questions and answers right now, but I feel like we should kind of keep moving on with our next two presenters, and we will have time afterwards for questions. And as far as I've ever called Russ, he's always willing to answer my phone calls, so I'm sure he will have time to answer everybody else's later on.
Yep. Feel free to reach out via email or phone call. So.
Okay. Moving on now, I just gave John Morels post in charge of the computer and screen, and he will continue on with the presentation. Okay, I can see it.
Can everybody see my screen here?
Yep, if you could just enlarge the PowerPoint. There we go.
Okay. So, like I said, my name is Jonathan Morales. I'm the program manager here at the Middle Fork Watershed District. So this presentation sort of starts out as a overview, sort of a big picture, and narrows down all the way to the subwatershed of Diamond Lake, which Andy will touch on more as far as subwatershed dynamics mapping and whatnot. But we'll get a good overview of what is our major watersheds. So the Middle Fork is situated within the North Fork Crow River major watersheds. You can see that going up to Polk County down to into Hennepin there. So with that, inside just Kandiyohi County, we have a number of different organizations that deal with water. So the North Fork Crow River Watershed District is a partner of ours. Work with them quite often. Chippewa River Water Cooperative Partnership, Hawk Creek, obviously us, the Middle Fork and the South Fork. So thinking about that is the different entities that come together to work with water sometimes can get a little confusing because people think a lot of times on political boundaries, but watersheds were formed in order to, or watershed districts, so that we can manage water on a watershed scale, which is much more efficient than political boundaries, because water doesn't really care about political boundaries. It doesn't follow them, it follows watershed boundaries. So that's why watersheds are, or watershed districts are shaped the way they are. So as you can see here, this is the shape of the Middle Fork. Starts up in Belgrade, and then we exit out. Our pour point is actually at Manana, the little town of Manana, and that's where the Middle Fork enters in the North Fork Crow River, the confluence there. So we've got about a 270 square miles. Counties that we reside in are Kandiyohi, Meeker, Stearns, Pope. Got quite a bit of drainage and a number of wetlands here in our watershed. So looking all Minnesota, watershed districts are not necessarily the norm. You can see all the established watershed districts here on this map, us being circled in red there. A lot of people think watershed districts and soil and water conservation districts are a similar thing. They are, but still watershed districts are based on the watershed boundary, whereas soil and water conservation districts are on that county boundary. But we do a lot of the same things, and you can reach out to either one of us with water issues and whatnot. But that's the sort of the story behind watershed districts. Actually, the Middle Fork Crow River Watershed District was established when 23 was coming through, when they're doing the big renovation of 23 going through Spicer. Individuals were concerned about water quality with the expansion of the road there and its proximity to Green Lake. And as the the residents looked into it. They found that a lot of grants weren't necessarily available to them unless they were an organized body, and a watershed district being one of those eligible bodies was established. So that's how we got our start. So again, taking a step back, water quality goals. So all of this comes back down to the Clean Water Act of 1972, the goal of having fishable, swimmable, and recreation in all our lakes and rivers. So that's something that we are constantly working towards, and definitely is part of our goal and our idea to work on as a watershed district. So as you can see here, we do have a lot of work to do. So 40% of Minnesota's lakes and streams are impaired for conventional pollutants. So these are nutrients such as phosphorus, total suspended solids, bacteria, chlorides, mercury, things like that. And as I'm going along, guys, if you, pretty easy to just pop in and ask a question. You just unmute yourself. If you have anything that comes to mind right off the bat that you really want to, that pertains to any given slide here, feel free to chime in. So a lot of different types of pollution, but two main sort of ideas as far as where pollution comes from. So you got point source, which is something like a water treatment facility or somewhere like a tile that you could, well, not necessarily, well, tile sometimes, but something that you can really tell where that's coming from. And that a lot of times point sources are regulated. So like industrial factories, sewage, stormwater, if you're a large enough city. But a lot of the pollutants that we're really struggling with are the non-point source pollution. So unregulated things like farmland, urban oil, grease, erosion happening either along lakes, rivers, things like that, bacteria from livestock, whatnot. And some of these things are somewhat regulated, but we're working on doing a better job with that. There's definitely some room for improvement there. So when we talk about water quality, there are a number of variables that we look at, and sort of you have to think about what are the variables that we have in or have somewhat control over. So when you look at temperature, precipitation, watershed size, depth of lake, a lot of those things aren't necessarily things that we can deal with, that we can really influence on our water bodies. Surface to lake area is a big deal as far as efficacy of projects and how much impact a given best management practice will have on a lake. But then when you get down to the bottom here, changes in land use, changes in drainage patterns, uses of best management practices, those are things that we definitely do have control over, and something that we can use to move that needle towards better water quality. So definitely things that we can do, although there are some things that are really just nature's course, but we can definitely help out. So when I'm talking about all of the water quality data, the chemistry data, all of it is based on our ecoregions. So not all Minnesota is created the same. So when we look at different chemistry regimes across Minnesota, these ecoregions are developed so that you are able to sort of compare apples to apples. So if you look, we're sort of situated in the north central hardwood forest. So that is going to that's going to dictate where our parameters or where our bars are for what's considered in the water quality standard or outside of a water quality standard for our area. And how we get to those numbers, one large picture way of looking at data, many of you probably have heard of eutrophic. eutrophic lake. A lot of times you think of something that a lake that's green, has a lot of eutrophism. It's highly productive, lots of algae, lots of weeds growing, and that is just one of the trophic states that exists. There's also mesotrophic lakes and oligotrophic lakes. So oligotrophic lakes you can almost think of as a sort of desert lake. There's not a lot of productivity. So like Lake Superior would be an oligotrophic lake. George, Green, sometimes they can trend into oligotrophy, but I wouldn't consider them a classic oligotrophic lake. They're more of a mesotrophic lake, sort of in that medium zone. When you look at the TSI value here, you can see there's a light pink and a brighter pink there. So there's eutrophic, and then there's super eutrophic. So yeah, this is based on a number of different readings that we take. Total phosphorus being one of them, chlorophyll A, and Secchi Disk. So those are all used in a calculation to come up with that Carson's trophic state index. So total phosphorus. I'll show a number of slides, total phosphorus, total suspended solids, Secchi Disk, and chlorophyll A for all of the lakes, so that you guys can see what Diamond Lakes looks in comparison to others. And then we'll zoom down into Diamond Lake and look at Diamond Lake specifically over the years, and you'll get a little more resolution as far as what you can see is in these graphs. So, but as far as phosphorus goes, it's the most limiting nutrient in a lake as far as productivity. So what that pretty much means is if there is enough phosphorus in the lake, you will keep growing and growing and growing, because all the other nutrients are not in excess. So if you have enough phosphorus, you can grow nonstop as long as you have sunlight and those others. So phosphorus is definitely that limiting nutrient, and something that definitely impacts lakes in a large way, and something that you'll hear us talking about as far as phosphorus reduction, best management practices that regulate phosphorus, and so on. Chlorophyll A. So chlorophyll A is a pigment found in green plants. It's just the photosynthetic pigment. So we use this to determine the algae content in a given water quality sample. As you can see, Nest and Diamond are higher, being in that eutrophic level. That's definitely has to do with phosphorus, and then that chlorophyll A, that algae growing off of the phosphorus. So Secchi disks, I'm not sure if any of you guys have ever seen, but right now Bob Shimorowski is our sampler on Diamond, and he goes out every month and takes water quality samples, but he also has a Secchi disk with him. And it's just a small disc, well, I don't know, probably a coffee can size lid, and it's got painted black and white cross on it so that you can see it as it goes down into the water column. And we use it to tell how clear the water is, water transparency, water clarity. And as you can see on this graph, it's sort of reversed. So these are, it's because that we're taking the water column and determining how far down can that Secchi disk travel in that water column before it disappears. And that's how we're getting our Secchi disk calculations readings. Okay, so here we're going to zoom in on I'm going to go through the same parameters, but here you can just see a little more clear as far as what the trend is as far as TP on Diamond Lake. This is through 2020. Diamond Lake does have a nice data trend on it as far as, or a data body. So we have a lot of data going back, especially with our Secchi disks on Diamond Lake. But you can see it's not a bad trend. It's not the best as far as statistically significant, but still we have a project that I'll talk about later in the presentation here that is going to be having better impacts and improvement as far as the subwatershed on Diamond Lake. So here you can see the chlorophyll A readings. Again, similar trend, not quite as, a little more drop on this as far as the trend line you can see there. Total suspended solids has been pretty consistent. You know, you can see spikes and troughs, but fairly consistent there. And then this is what I was talking about as far as the Secchi readings. We've got some Secchi readings that date back to the 1975, which is pretty cool. We don't have a whole lot of lakes that have Secchi readings from that far back. So with any of this data, it's public data, guys. So you're welcome to use it, and I can get it to you anytime you need. You just have to let me know and give me enough time, and I can definitely pull this data for you, and you guys can use it with newsletters, or if you just want to do your own research, I can provide you raw data as well in the form of an Excel sheet or whatnot. But done work with a number of lake associations and had some really interesting articles and slides and whatnot come out of that. So happy to share this information with anybody that's interested. So now we're going to get into one of the best management practices, one of the larger best management practices that the watershed has ever taken on. It's the Hubbard Shultz Wheeler Chain of Lakes Shallow Lake Drawdown. So this is a project that's been many years in the making, was started with Ducks Unlimited and with the Lassard's SAMS grant. And this is sort of a project, if you think about prairie. Excuse me. Many people understand that prairies have natural successions where they have to go through burns, and in order to keep that prairie healthy, keep it in its natural state. Well, with the hydrology, the way we have used the land, a lot of our wetlands and shallow ponds aren't able to go through this period of drawdown, this period of drought, in order to reset them similar to as a prairie with a prairie burn. So what we have done with the Hubbard Shultz Wheeler Chain of Lakes, we went in and did that for it. So if you look here on this picture, this aerial photo, you can see the typical drainage pattern of Schultz, North Wheeler, South Wheeler, and Hubbard. And as we did excuse me one second. We conducted what is called a TMDL study, a total maximum daily load study on the Diamond Lake Subwatershed. And what we found was that a large portion of the phosphorus that was entering Diamond Lake came from the HSW Hubbard Shultz Wheeler Chain of Lakes. So with that understanding, we went forth and started looking at what can we do to help remediate that influx of phosphorus from this chain of lakes. And we decided to go with a shallow lake drawdown. So here you can see the project. So essentially what we did was reverse the flow of the Hubbard Shultz Wheeler chain and dumped it back into County Ditch 28, which ends up going back into the North Fork, connected to the North Fork, or Middle Fork into the North Fork there. And we did this by putting up barriers and installing water control structures, and also doing a large trench. So if you look up at site 1 where there's a star there, we had to do what we call the Grand Canyon of Kandiyohi County for a while. There was a big cut to get that elevation of Schultz Lake down to the elevation of County Ditch 28, so that we could actually start a drawdown process of these lakes. With that, we installed water control structures, like I said, at site 2 and site 3. And there was also a water barrier at site 4. And that was so that we could manipulate the basins independent of one another, so that we could, draw down Schultz without drawing down North Wheeler if necessary. And then there was also some excavation done in the basins of the lakes so that we could draw all the way down to the lowest point of the lake, or at least close. So some of the things that really come about from a shallow lake drawdown is a reactivation of natural native seed beds. Also in the chain of lakes here, there's a large population of curly leaf pondweed. And with that, we were hoping that through this drawdown, by keeping the lakes drawn down through the winter, we were able to have a kill off of the curly leaf, have some consolidation of the sediments, and then some establishment of native species again, so that these lakes could come back healthier and not so much laden with quite so much available phosphorus. Phosphorus is still there, but we're trying to sequester it in these basins, have it rather than having it free flowing through. And that's done with establishment of vegetation and consolidation of sediments there. Any questions on this project? I know I'm going sort of fast here, but it was a big project. It was, a number of years, many partners, Ducks Unlimited, DNR, a lot of people had to come together to make this this work, and it's still being managed. It's early on in the process, and I will show you some data on that right now. So the trophic state, as far as Hubbard Shultz Wheeler, you can see them here. We don't have a lot of data on this this chain of lakes just because it's a newer thing for us. So really, in order to get a good feel for what a lake is doing or what a trend is doing, you need more than 10 years of data or so, depending on what parameters you're looking at. But we're starting to get an idea, but there's definitely some more management that's been going on with the Hubbard Shultz Wheeler chain. For instance, we just had a partial drawdown that happened just this last winter of Schultz. So still working on management with the DNR on that. So
John, this is Jim. What's the impact, or I'm sorry, what were the expected results of this project and what were the actual results so far? And I mean, it seems like phosphorus increased in our lake in 2020. How does that tie together?
Yeah, so Josh Kavanaugh, really an expert on this. He's done many of the drawdowns, and he would say the same thing as I hear, that it's early on in this project. So of course, we were going to see a bit of a increase right off the bat because through that work, we're, by dredging up, by doing, trying to get into the middle of the lakes, we disturb sediments and whatnot. And through allowing them to fill up and resume their natural path, there was going to be some equilibrium that's going to have to be met. So it's still in flux. It's early in the process. So the ideal, as I was saying, as far as the natural progression, the natural regime of a shallow lake, is that it goes through these droughts and that native species can come up and grow. And that's the goal, is that we get establishment of native species. And native species, unlike say curly leaf comes up hard in the spring, dies off midsummer, and you have a large influx of phosphorus, more phosphorus. These basins were full of it, and so all of that was just flowing right into Diamond Lake there. So the goal was to have less of that, right? Less curly leaf, hopefully more native species. And with those native species, they don't have the life cycle like that, where they're releasing large amounts of phosphorus into the water column. And a lot of the native species will help buffer phosphorus. So they'll take up nutrients And a lot of times they'll actually create areas. I'm sure everybody's been walking along the shoreline and they get into the sort of bulrushes or whatnot, and they step down and they were in nice sort of sandy area, and then all of a sudden they're like, ooh, that's goopy. Well, that's good. That's, you know, those are the phosphorus sinks, right? We want those phosphorus sinks in lakes, and that's why we ask people to, you know, you can have, you know, what we understand, you want access to the lake, you want some, you know, maybe some sandy shore there or whatnot. There's some areas where you may need some riprap or whatnot, but the more area that we have with native vegetation that looks wild, that has that natural process going on, the more that those processes will help us rather than go the other direction. Does that answer your question, Tim?
Well, it does, but yes, but and my recollection is that there was a study done before this project was undertaken that identified that 80% of the phosphorus in Diamond Lake originated in those chain of lakes.
Yep.
So
that's that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. I was just going to wrap up by saying, and I think that's important that we continue to focus on this single point of phosphorus, because I imagine the other 20% have 100 different sources.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Okay.
And
that's the study that I was talking about that was the precursor to the Hubbard Shultz Wheeler drawdown. It was the total maximum daily load, or the TMDL study. So lots of lakes have TMDLs. It's a common practice, and in that study, that's why we identified the Hubbard Shultz Wheeler chain. So it's a good study, and it's definitely illuminated our eyes to this project, but the project still has a ways to go to really be able to come into maturity.
John, this is Eric again. You know, you touched on the dredging of the channels and so forth, and that basically just kind of stirred the pot and released a lot of phosphorus. It was like thousands of carp. You know, carp are our enemies,
right?
And I don't think that we could have gotten a worse year in terms of cooperation with Mother Nature when we did that first initial drawdown.
Yeah, that fill-up happened fast.
Yeah, it was. I think that it probably got the carp killed, but it wasn't. It didn't draw it down for a long enough period for the native species to really kind of reestablish themselves. And so I'm real optimistic for the next drawdown. I think we're going to see a lot better numbers after that second one.
Yeah, no, the farmers were happy that we had some storage for water. That's for sure, because that spring when we were filling up, so with the statute that we use to draw down the lakes, they can only be in active drawdown for 2 years, and that's so that the lakes can refill. Well, it took this chain of lakes like 3 months to fill up. So I mean, it once we allowed them to refill, they filled up super fast, and that's not necessarily like you put together good for the project. You'd like to see those soils exposed to warm water or warm weather longer than that. So and just the fact that the large influx of water when the sediments by necessity were disturbed, so that we could create those channels within the basins so they could be drawn down. But yeah, it wasn't ideal. That's for sure.
I'm optimistic for next time if Mother Nature cooperates. So
there you go.
It's all good.
That's a mind of Verdona. No, we're still working, and that's the great thing about this, though. With the way this was built, it's very flexible as far as how we approach the drawdowns and how we're able to manage the lakes independent of one another. All right, so here you can see Chain of Lakes, phosphorus went up a bit there. Not the highest it's ever seen, but it did go up. So, which is understandable with the activity that we were doing there. And then chlorophyll A following suit because it's got accessibility to phosphorus. And then suspended solids because that's what phosphorus is, suspended sediments and whatnot in the column. And you can see a reduction in our Secchi Disk depth because of chlorophyll A and total suspended solids in the water column here in the Chain of Lakes. All right, so any questions on the Hubbard Shultz Wheeler project before I move on to just sort of talking about best management practices in a little larger context? Okie dokie. So best management practices, Hubbard Shultz Wheeler was definitely more of a sort of rural project. We do a number of different types of rural projects, egg-related projects. We also work with cities and more urban landowners for projects as well. So one of a real successful study that we conducted was called Accelerated Implementation. And that was a study that we used to look at the subwatersheds of Spicer and New London. And with that, we actually used a modeling software called P8. The P8 stands for the Program for Predicting Polluting Particle Passage Through Pits, Puddles, and Ponds. Some clever engineer came up with that name, I'm sure. But essentially what it does is it takes a watershed and divides it up into smaller subwatersheds. And then you go in and assign each one of those little individual watersheds. So if you look up here in the upper right-hand corner, you can see it's sort of the city of Spicer is then divided up into sort of color shaded areas. Well, each one of those are assigned land use characteristics, precipitation characteristics. Are there any existing projects or impairments in those areas? And how do those areas interact with the land and whatnot? So with that, by layering all that data on top of each other and running it through this program for predicting polluting particle passage through pits, puddles, and ponds, we were able to create these hotspot maps. And that was in order to see where we would see the most impairment, but at the same time, where we would see the most potential for impact, for positive impact. So with running that, we then took those areas that we saw that had high rating or high hotspots, let's just call them hotspots, and took those and then put in hypothetical projects. So say we looked at an area and we thought, okay, well, this could be a good water storage area. So there's another modeling program called HydroCAD, and we were able to use HydroCAD and model what would say sediment basin in this area do for water quality. And it kicks out numbers and you can see reductions. And through that process of using HydroCAD and P8, we were able to come up with a prioritized list of projects that were our most bang for your buck in the watershed. So obviously we don't have unlimited resources, unlimited dollars to use. So we want to use our dollars wisely. And then what took this process one more step further was that we were able to then go in, had a really successful round with New London by going in, talking with them and working with them on a design level for street reconstruction, because a lot of these projects are related to stormwater runoff. And if there's street reconstructs or any runoff construction, stormwater construction kind of stuff, you're gonna get a much better value when you already have all of that mobilized and you can work at a design level versus going in and retrofitting, paying to dig, paying to put back, all that. If it's already got a hole in the ground, you're halfway there. So very interesting process, and a process that we're definitely seeing improvements from in London, and we're working with Spicer on doing the same thing. And then on the main stem of the Middle Fork, we also conducted a similar study that we're working on implementing currently. So here's a picture of a tree trench. So this is one of the urban BMPs that would have been spec'd out in that accelerated implementation grant. They're a pretty cool best management practice in that you got a nice tree there, and what it does is you almost do a little cut in your curb, and that diverts water into these tree planting areas that have an engineered soil called Stockholm soil, and that soil is able to scrub off some of the nutrients. The trees can use the nutrients, and then rather than having that stormwater just rush into our streams and rivers and ponds and lakes, it's treated, and it's able to go into the ground, groundwater recharge. But then also we do have overflows because we understand the necessity for stormwater and the movement of water when we do have big rain events. Rain gardens. Diamond Lake has one of the nicest rain gardens around. There's some beautiful rain gardens out there. This is something that any landowner can do, something that we'd be more than happy to come out and meet with the landowners and help them design and sort of just spec out and think about how would be a rain garden, how would it fit on their area, and what kind of benefits that would have as far as to their property, and I think they look pretty cool to begin with. So another part of what we do at the Watershed District is our rules and regulations. This is something that we're working more closely with the county on now. So the Watershed District doesn't have a lot of rules that it's necessarily enforcing because they were sort of doubling up with some of the county standards. So a lot of the regulation as far as erosion control and stormwater is done through the county or the MPCA, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. So as I was talking about before, we're sort of thinking about why we want native vegetation, how that can help our lakes, our water quality. And you can sort of look at these two pictures. And when I was talking about as far as phosphorus sinks, if you're thinking about walking through these reeds, that's where you'd have that muck, that gushy substrate on the bottom. Well, that's valuable. You know, you want that. Every lake's going to have phosphorus. And unless you have areas where that phosphorus can reside and can be sequestered, can act as a sink, not a source, it's going to be available. And so here's a good example of a nice, they have some access to the lake there, but at the same time, this lake has a nice sink for phosphorus and some native vegetation habitat there as well. Versus areas where you see manicured lawn all the way up to the edge, that water does not have many places to go other than right across the top of that manicured lawn, carrying with it any phosphorus, nutrients, and whatnot straight into the lake. So especially allowing vegetation to grow up near the shore is important because that does provide somewhat of a barrier, and water can be held back by that vegetation, and it's also much less likely to erode because you know, Kentucky bluegrass soil or roots don't go very deep in the soil. And if you look here, here's a little diagram. Here's bluegrass, sort of the bottom middle picture here, compared to switchgrass, prairie cordgrass, and even some of the nice forbs such as blazing star. that are really beautiful plants, but not necessarily going to look like a manicured lawn. They are native plants, but they, you know, they can be done in ways that make them more, you know, look more upkept for people that are worried about having it look like a prairie, because, you know, these are prairie plants, and that's their trend, to look like a prairie. But they can be used in many different ways. So, but yeah, with those roots, those are the big thing that are really holding your lakeshore and keeping that valuable lakeshore property where it belongs, on the lakeshore versus in the lake. So very much a good tool to use for erosion control along your shoreline. So when we're talking about sort of shoreline zones, there's an upland zone all the way through submergent vegetation and open water. In those areas, different plants are gonna be able to survive in different depths. And that's sort of something that, if you are looking to reintroduce native vegetation, that's something that we could talk to you and work with you on. So, but yeah, many different benefits to having this kind of natural vegetation growing on shorelines and whatnot. Any question on that? It's very easily underappreciated when you look at a shoreline, how much that native shoreline, those native species are doing for lake water quality. Sometimes not the most popular subject though. All right. So here's just another example, not to beat a dead horse, but yeah, you can see some of the differences here in erosion and the shorelines makeup there. One other branch of the Middle Fork Watershed District is our education outreach program. This has been a little different lately, obviously because of COVID, but as we're starting to reopen and whatnot, you'll see more of these kinds of events available to our area and to the people that live here. But in the past, we've done cleanup events where people get together and go to lake accesses and along the river and pick up debris. And we also partnered with Prairie Woods Environmental Learning Center in the past and done a paddle the crow just for fun and to get people out and talk to them about all the interesting things that I talked to you guys tonight about. Another interesting thing that we're doing with the cities is adopt a drain, sort of like adopt a highway, but you can actually go in and adopt a storm drain so that you keep debris. So a lot of people don't put make that connection necessarily, that stormwater doesn't go to any treatment facility. That water goes straight into our lakes and rivers untreated. So whatever's on our rivers, or I mean, whatever's on our roads goes into our rivers and lakes, whether that be pet business, dirt, oil, salt, all that stuff as a direct conduit to our lakes and rivers. So this is a education and action campaign that we hope will help remediate some of that issue there. All right, that's it. I'm going to turn it over to Andy, and he's going to get a little more into looking at the maps and what's going on as far as water movement and the Diamond Lake subwatershed, unless anybody has any last minute questions on what I've touched on so far. Okay, it's all yours, Andy. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Every time it comes up where I'm waiting, if you're gonna say all the pronunciations for P8, you always get it right. So that was good because I would stumble every single time. Let's see if I can try sharing my screen. Host disabled participants for screen share. I think I'm still, oh, I think you're still host. In the top right corner of my icon, the 3 dots should be able to give me hosting abilities.
There you go. Should be coming your way.
Stop. Okay. And I still just have, it says I'm the host, trying to get to this so I can share my screen, and it's having a little issue right now. Okay, here we go now. Should be able to, majority of the eyes see a screen I have up. Okay. I don't have this in PowerPoint, I just have it in a report. In this report, I can actually couple them to these. I'm just going to go over, and I can actually send them out to the Diamond Lake Association for distribution, or just look at later on. So right now, I'm just going to go over a little bit, touch in detail. I know John did a little bit of the function of the watershed. I'm going to go over a little bit more of just the watershed, so that everybody can have a really good understanding of what really takes place inside those boundaries, and most importantly, what the most immediate boundaries are in locations around for the Diamond Lakes subwatershed. The term watershed kind of gets used as a very general term. They're not all the same, mainly in size and function. A couple quick facts here. Have about Diamond Lake. The total surface area is about 1,600 acres. The subwatershed area, which is the area that surrounds Diamond Lakes, where all the precipitation, snow melt, anything going off for your yard will eventually reach into the lake of flow, is about 19,000 acres. So it's quite a large area of land. The max depth for Diamond Lake is about 27 feet. It's not necessarily a deep lake, but is considered a deep lake. Shallow lakes are lakes about 15 feet in depth, or 80% more of it is the littoral area. The littoral area for Diamond Lake is 635 acres. And in case someone doesn't really know what the littoral area is considered, it kind of means like the light rich zone of the lake, extending from the ordinary high water mark, which pretty much where about the water might be up on the shore, to the deepest depth that's capable of, supporting submerged aquatic plants and species. And this is the area where not only does closer to the shore, I know as John previously mentioned, any plants on the shore can help to break up the wave action, but it's also where most of the ecology happens. And like, especially for fish when they're very, very young and smelting and fry fish, it's very important for the littoral area and the plants to have that ecosystem for there to survive. Right now here going, I'll show this here is the whole boundary area of the Middle Fork Crover Watershed District. It is 270 square miles. You kind of start up here, you kind of have Belgrade up here, the Middle Fork comes down here through Metamont and Gallia, down through New London, goes into Nest, Green, all past the bottom past Calhoun, and kind of ends up flowing over this way towards Manana. Diamond Lake is down in here. So just because this Diamond Lake is more on the bottom receiving end of the watershed, where a flow is all coming and pointing out this area, that does not mean that the area up here necessarily affects the water quality of Diamond Lake. And we'll get in that in a little bit when I'll just kind of move on to talking more about the watershed. So here's kind of like a basic diagram for kind of a watershed. I know for the naming of it, I know, the the term watershed is used in general, but the size of it is very different. So over here, you have different names that they go from large size of region. Say there might only be 21 actual regions in the whole United States. One of them in ours is Upper Mississippi, down to subregion, basement, some watershed, watershed, which is the size of the Middle Fork River watersheds, and there's about 22,000 of them on average in the United States. And then the subwatershed, which is, we'll get to the subwatershed for Diamond Lake. So moving on here, subwatershed and watersheds, because of the kind of general term and different naming form, some people also kind of go name it as what is called as hydrologic unit code. And it's kind of a number given to each area in size, kind of gives it as its zip code. It names it, you know, where am I? Where is this one actually located? And then of course the size at the same time. So moving up here, you know, I mentioned that there might be about 21 regions in the United States, and then the digit form is 07. So we can just have like a HUC2, hydrologic unit code of 2. And Upper Mississippi here is shown, if you can see in this black area right here where my cursor is, this here 07 is just the region of the Upper Mississippi. So any precipitation, water, snow melt, you know, flush the toilet, whatever, eventually will run down the Mississippi and down to this pour point here and kind of exit effluents at one point. That's also a general thing with watersheds is water can fall anywhere in there and flow up or down and around, but eventually it will all flow out at about one port. They pretty much have about one pour point. So moving on here, we got the Upper Mississippi. This is the region that we're in, and then they can break down even smaller and smaller and smaller. The watershed size in looking at catchment size can get very small. You can even get to individual size of one person's lawn. You can even break a lawn up where, you know, you have a gallon of water and you dump it on a lawn, it might flow one way or the other. So breaking this down up in here, we're actually in the Mississippi headwaters. And that gets broken down even further to the Upper Mississippi Crow Rum. We're in a 6. And now we're getting more in a little, I don't want to say a local, but a large area. And this is the larger North Fork Crow River subbasin, where in green here it shows the same shape as the Middle Fork Crow River subwatershed. So this is the area here which we are focusing on and our district is in. Same here, moving over to green. This here is the HUC 10, we'll say, or the watershed of the Middle Fork Crow River. And it is broken down again into 10 different digits. And these digits, as John mentioned before, aren't like boundary lines. It's not like someone goes, decides where are we doing this. There's more economic development in this area versus this one is where our barn is going to go. It's all topographical of how the landscape and how the water flows off of it and how it's divided. So the Middle Fork Crow River Watershed District is divided up into 10 of these subwatersheds, with the one in blue here being the Diamond Lake subwatershed. Very nice. It's actually named for the lake in there because it's the dominant water body in that area. So even dividing further and further, here we'll give it, this area in yellow here actually was the area in blue here, the Diamond Lake subwatershed. Sorry, my screen is moving. And as you can see, these black lines here, everything yellow, we are breaking down the subwatershed of Diamond Lake even further and further. And this can get even smaller up until I mentioned, little yards and even in yards. Everything can get broken down further. The rain falls on your roof. Your roof divides it to one side or the other before it goes in the gutter, and so on. That will eventually flow. Everything will eventually meet back up in a larger catchment area. But we like to look things at a little bit smaller scale to try to refine what's really going on. And so the area in purple, obviously everybody should know, is Diamond Lake, and it's split up into the catchments. Every catchment, as we mentioned, in a watershed has basically one pour point, one point where all the water there is going to exit. And that is shown by these red dots here. So this here is one catchment up by the town of Atwater. Everything in here will eventually pour out into this out here in this area and flow into and continue to keep going. So here's a Hubbard Shultz Wheeler chain of lakes. You can see they're flowing into each other and into the lake, although this map obviously is not going to show our project on there. But if once we, if there were the next drawdown to occur, when we change the water structures, the water will flow in reverse out here and back up into the county ditch. This is the Kandiyohi County line. Moving further and further, most of this, what I look at when I'm trying to find out areas and making maps and trying to get a better understand the landscape, there are lots of powerful modeling programs and tools out there for GIS. It's a graphic information system, powerful tool. And there's lots of them that help predict where we are. I mean, it's really hard to get with the area size of the Watershed district, which is 270 square miles. It's really hard to know what's going on in the area as a whole. It takes a long time. You know, the district right now only has 2 employees in it, me and John. Before I come on, it was pretty much just John. So it's really hard to get an area. So we kind of rely on programs and modeling programs to help predict and to know what's going on. They're very useful. They do have a little degree of accuracy for them. And we do like to get out there and actually, you know, get our feet in the ground and get our eyes out there and even hear from the locals to really know what's going on to get a better understanding. So this here again is showing Diamond Lake's subwatershed area as a whole. Now it's split up into 2 different colors here, as you can see, this yellow and the kind of gold orange. It's because this area in the yellow up here, even though it is Diamond Lake's the subwatershed area, no water, precipitation, or snowmelt or anything in the area in yellow should really flow into the lake. It's pretty much all moving out. That being said, everything what you can see here in the orange around Diamond Lake is the area on the landscape that will have some sort of effect on the water chemistry of the lake, whether that be you know, positive or negative. Kind of depends on what happens with the landscape around there. And you can see it is quite a large area. So there are lots of different areas. You can see where there are main channels or ephemeral streams, may there be flowing all the time or just at certain times of the year that affect the lake. And I also just want to point out one thing. I know it was mentioned earlier, the question came up about the Hubbard Shultz Wheeler chain of lakes and the TMDL that was done on it, where it mentioned, this was done before I came on and I haven't looked at it, but it mentioned that 80% about of the phosphorus entering the lake is from the Hubbard Shultz Wheeler chain of lakes. To me, that seems a bit high, and some people might think, well, that's a lot, and it is. But look at all the area also affecting here the Hubbard Shultz Wheeler chain of lakes. So just because the predicted reports and modeling mention that so much of the phosphorus and loading is coming from the lakes, which may be true, the actual area above the lakes that have runoff and loading into lakes is about 50%, looking at the whole area for Diamond Lakes area. So there is a lot of focus on the lakes because our project is there, but most of the area affecting the lakes actually is much farther up in the lake. And it's hard to really tell right now what effect or individual drainage the town of Atwater could have. They very possibility that there could be a couple of culverts and drainage from the town helping to go in there. Even though Atwater is not a very large town, you know, adopting a drain for culverts and ditches does have effect for everything. So moving on, this is just a more of an aerial view of the lake with a little background on it. Again, still showing the flow and the pour points of water where it can go. And we can even, through modeling programs, refine this really in depth and really get down into the nitty-gritty scale of each individual landscape of where it's going to show. And I'll go to that later on. There's something called a ratio gap, and that's in relation to, you know, what size area is flowing into the watershed. So a ratio of the watershed size of about 19,400 acres, as I mentioned, that are influencing the lake, but the lake itself is only 1,600 acres. That's like for every 1 acre of water body you have in the lake, you have about 12 acres on the landscape that can have some impact to the water quality at any moment, depending. Mother Nature is such a big factor of what happens to water quality, and also what we do in the landscape can in reverse have a greater factor, positive or good. Like I say, we build projects, we have practices that can help that out. The percent littoral area, again, that is the area of depth of around 15 feet where the sunlight usually can reach in to get those in lake emergent plants to help out with slowing some force of wave action, giving some ecosystem services, and having the plant roots themselves, the aquatic plant roots, like holding in there, kind of like rebar, like holding into the soil. This here is a kind of little general picture of what I mentioned before about really getting in depth right on the lakeshore and even on the landscape with some modeling tools. This is a modeling tool called a stream power index, and it's basically tries to model the erosive force and the power of water running off of that landscape from what type of landscape may be there, whether it be forest or a road is a little bit harder for the program to tell, but basically it takes in factors averages of precipitation, temperatures of soils throughout the year over like a 10 or 15-year span, and tries to refine it of where water is going to go. This year is right on the north side, actually, of Diamond Lake. This is the county park down here, if you can see, and we can really get a good understanding of what's going on. I've had in other areas, I've looked at a tool like this for a while before I was going to go talk with a landowner or get to a certain site, and looked and said, oh, well, it shows right here that there's actually more of a erosive force coming in red across this field before it gets to the little forest line up here. And now to go out there on site, and for the most part, they're basically, this is really pretty spot on. It really is pretty accurate. Although with every program and things like computers, we always like to take a little degree of accuracy. We do like to go visit the site and see what it is firsthand and really actually hear with people out there to know. It's hard to really get a good understanding going out and seeing a site once or twice versus someone that may be living there and have lived there for 20 years. The eyes and ears on the ground are very important to us. As I mentioned before, John and I are pretty much the only two people around covering such a large area. So it's having eyes and ears out there to help for information is extremely valuable. This is just a little bit, I know John already touched up on this, is the exact same information he gave for Diamond Lake. This is just a little different scale from the PCA. This is called a trophic state index, and it's kind of like a grading scale of averages. Not quite really for always exact samples, but it's got a little metrics to it that helps give these numbers, and it can help show from the clear oligotrophic to the very hypereutrophic scale. The overall trophic state index of what they're going for actually is like a 53. Diamond Lakes is a 60. I don't know. Most people, I'm hoping in the Lake Association, do know that Diamond Lake is impaired for nutrients. That's been a long-term focus for us, and the phosphorus is up a little bit. Again, this kind of just shows all the samples. Every sample on here that was taken to help make up this trophic state index was taken either by volunteer samplers or by people working in the district. And thank you for all the volunteer samplers for always helping to save us time and to take samples for us, and for everyone. They are very valuable long-term. You really need a good idea of what's going on. This is just showing a little standard here for phosphorus. In the north central hardwood forest ecoregion that we are in the state, they want the total phosphorus number of 40 parts per billion is pretty much the standard. Once you get above that over an average of 5 years, you will be put on the PCA's impair list, and that comes out every 2 years. And at the same reverse, once you're on the impaired list, you need to have a average, a 10-year average that is below the standard for more than 5 years to get removed from the list. Getting removed from the list sometimes can be a very long process. For chlorophyll A, it is 14, and for Secchi Disk, transparency is 1.4 meters, not feet. This is already shown before. Transparency trend for diamond. It is a slight improvement. It is not always, not the greatest, clearest improvement you ever might hope for, but actually for the very large land use around Diamond Lake, showing an improvement or even a slight steady is better than a negative. So I had something, sorry, cruising through here. The Watershed District. So most of this was kind of touched on a little bit by John about the actual standards of the lake and our sampling. This is just a very basic. I've gone over about a watershed. If anybody has any question on the watershed or what watersheds are, or even the immediate subwatershed looking around Diamond Lake, let me know. I have a couple other slides or images I can zoom in and show you. Beyond that, we actually had a grant a couple years ago awarded from the Minnesota Board of Water Soil Resources, specifically for the lakes in our district that are impaired, which are Ness and Diamond. And we kind of had some mapping with a little bit done, and then main focus on it was a little bit of education, kind of for ourselves to really know what the mindset and attitudes and awareness were of the locals around there, so we could help better plan for ourselves and kind of learn of what's out there. So I will move on with going over a couple of results that were mailed out. This was over a year ago. We mailed out about 700 letters. So hopefully, if you were on, you got a letter or two in the mailbox a while ago. And thank you for everybody who mailing one out. But before I move on to the survey results from those mailings and education, I didn't know if anybody had any questions real quick or wanted me to look into an area of concern or just something to bring up about the subwatershed or the area around Diamond Lake. I'm not. Okay, I will just move right over here. As I mentioned, we did previously, we mailed out, we tried to get a address for every single person in the immediate lake shore around Diamond Lake, and some that were not actually on the water, but were very, very close across the road, well enough that they had effect, and we wanted to kind of know some information just to kind of learn. So if you did get a letter in the mail, it first of all kind of looked like this. We're just trying to want to thank you and kind of give us a little knowing of what we were and what our motive was. And then on the backside, they had some questions here. And most people, hopefully, like I say, you did get one in the mail. And within each letter, we actually had a little education and just kind of some best management practices and ideas and concepts of what goes on that can influence a lake and its water chemistry. With the 19,000 some acres affecting Diamond Lake, majority of it has been over time is now in crop production use. There are some forests and some prairies around there, and there actually are a couple pretty large wetlands within a couple of the small lakes helping to affect it. And you can see just from the general diagram of when water hits the surface of our ground, we do really want it to slowly percolate into the soils and as much as possible. And also we kind of want it to slowly maybe stay where it is a little bit of time. We don't want it to rain really fast. We don't want everything, this big deluge of water rushing over the land and quickly going downstream into our lakes and rivers. We would like for it to stay there as long as possible. And the roots of plants are kind of like a little game of shoots and ladders to help it along, pass it further, go through into soil. The more the water percolates and slowly goes into the groundwater, the cooler it is, which helps to retain dissolved oxygen levels, which are important for mainly extremely important in the very early stages of life for aquatic species for growth, and also helps out. You pretty much need more oxygen for decomposition too for things. Versus disturbed shoreline, if you can see the really shallow roots, obviously water move off, it's really warm. I'll just jump on this one more time. I know it was mentioned about the lawns, the roots are really small. The longer the foliage of a plant, generally speaking, the longer the roots of that plant will be. So when we have our lawns and we keep, we need to keep mowing them to keep them the way that we want them for our own use. When we keep doing that, the plant will spend a lot of its energy actually trying to continue to grow its foliage up as much as it can, because it needs those blades to capture the sunlight for photosynthesis for its energy. If we let them grow a little bit longer, those roots in turn will grow down a little bit longer, helping to infiltrate more water in the ground. Also, at the same time, the roots farther down will have a greater reach for nutrients in the ground, which will require less fertilizer overall, and less fertilizer helps to keep our water quality a little bit cleaner. Just moving around, I know this thing of this is kind of showing the littoral zone broken up into different zones, and having, I know it was mentioned before, we're not trying to completely retouch on the things, but having a no-mow line or some sort of buffer between the water flowing off the land to the lake and into the lake is very important, as well as having the buffer in the lake up on the shoreline. You may think of, a couple lily pads or, some bulrush or reeds in the lake as not being very powerful, but every little stem and blade in the water slowly will be will take a little bit of pounds of force of wave action over time. And as everybody knows, water really does never stop moving, and waves can be powerful. So this was just the other letter that was sent out the second time. I'm not going to go through it, but I will email us out to later, and I'm hopefully everybody already had one of these. And again, it was attached with one more mailing, pretty much showing about the same concept of the immediate shoreline and some practices and ideas and concepts with having a habitat ecosystem that is healthy for the lake and aesthetically pleasing for lots of times. And I will just continue to move on. This is a little touched up. I know John mentioned that phosphorus is the limiting factor for the lake, and this barrel kind of helps us show it like that, with which each slat of the barrel being some sort of micro or macronutrient that a plant may need. The lowest limiting factor is phosphorus. Just going to kind of move on to more of the results of this survey, because this hopefully was already touched on. Okay, so here we go. So the questions were very general. We had about 10 of them. There was no right or wrong answer. There was basically possibly one trick question, and we'll get to that later on. But this was just broken down between Ness and Diamond Lake. They both have very good active lake associations, and I just kind of want to know, about who was coming up with members. Out of all the responses, pretty much everybody that responded, of the 86 people that responded to the survey, Diamond Lake had the greatest percent of people who said they were in a lake association. that's going on too. Everything going forward, everything in orange will be for Diamond Lake, and everything in blue will be for Nest Lake. So this helps. So this was a question to do. How long have you been a member of the Lake Association? As you can see with the orange, there's we had about 27 responses with who actually answered this question. And then we have the average here. So the average for blue here for Nest Lake is about say 12 years for a lake association, but for Diamond Lake up here, we're looking at off of the survey about 18 years is about what responders said for the average of how long they've been in a lake association, which is fantastic. That's extremely good news. Don't want to give bragging rights to Nest Lake, but you can pat yourself on the back because Diamond Lake, it looks like, is beating Nest Lake for average for Lake Association members. And this does have a great effect for understanding of people long-term, of education and awareness to help to really know what's going on in the area, and to help us keep informed and to give the Watershed District some support as well. Another question we had is, are you a member of any other environmental conservation organization? Coming down here on the bottom for Diamond Lake, we have the yeses in orange and the grays on here. No, there were about twice as many people that said, no, I am not a part of any other organization than the Lake Association. That's okay. In the other people that said they were, these are kind of the main ones up here. Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, Arbor Day, and the Nature Conservancy were the top 4 other organizations that people had got into and said that they were a part of. And this is great news for all local governments of unit and even these programs, because we really like to partner with other people. I am not an expert in anything at the Watershed District. I have lots of skills or soft skills, but not expert. And having other partners to help rely on for information and at time funds really can make a big difference. I know it was mentioned the Hubbard Shultz Wheeler project had a lot of help with Ducks Unlimited, and they helped financially and project wise with that. So that was great. This question here, how long have you lived on the lake? I know we obviously have a couple outliers here, people who have lived there for 50, 60 years, but in general, on average here, this trend line, you see about 21 years or 22 years is about the average that most people have lived on Diamond Lake. To me, having not lived in any place for more than 10 years at one time, that seems like a long time. And that is a long time. And again, that is good news. We kind of like to hear that. When you get people that are constantly rotating in and out of not just lakes, but residence times, people living in different apartments or areas, it's known that it's easier for someone to get more attached and have a like-minded attitude for the area they live in when they've lived there longer, know the people around it, and can share the same instances and stories. Also, family generations, long time hold on to traditions, have a greater sense of pride, and then just have a more education mindset for conservation for the next generation. People that can grow up. If you've grown up on a lake for a long time and you're raising your kids on the lake for a long time and they're in the Lake Association, they're learning about the education, about possible best management practices, the chances are greater that will carry forward on long term and help out. It was just a simple question there. All right, this was a question number 4. Who do you think helps monitor and maintain the quality of the lakes? Again, there's no right or wrong answer for this. Most people, for a total, in both everything, thought the DNR was the person who helped monitor and maintain the quality of the lakes, along with the Watershed District and the Lake Association. There was a little bit of SWCD in there and owners. Well, this is true. The DNR does help to monitor and maintain the quality of lakes. That is one of their primary functions and mission goals. And we like to work with the DNR as much as possible. Josh Kavanaugh has done a lot of work and helped out with Hubbard Shultz Wheeler chain of lakes. And the other one, the Watershed District, where there is watershed districts, yes, we do the majority of the monitoring for the lakes around the area. Lots of the funds can at times come from help with the PCA, who actually was very low on the list. Actually surprised me. And then the Lake Association themselves. Everybody here listening to this right now, and even many that can't make it, have volunteered some of their time and commitment to help maintain the quality of the lakes, to help give some eyes and ears when we need to, and we greatly appreciate that. And it is good just to know who to call. If you have a question or a concern, it is important to know who to call. I hope if someone ends up calling the U of M for something condition wise in the lake and they're unaware of it, it would be nice to know if the person at the U of M will contact the DNR or the Watershed District for help. But it is very good to know the legal working area in there. Are you aware of any lakes or rivers where you live that do not meet the MPCA requirement standard for water quality in the area? This here, again for Diamond Lake, there were more people that said they did not know the standard, or if there was a water body in the area that was impaired. It's hard to know. These surveys don't come back with names on them. We didn't even bother to even want to go into that, but it would, at a standpoint right now, be nice to think long-term of the residents around there that knows that their water body is impaired, so that if some instance or action comes up, that they will hopefully try to make a right choice to help reduce impairments on that. Currently, Diamond Lake is impaired for nutrients, as we mentioned before. It is also impaired for mercury in fish tissue, which, if anybody ever ends up looking at the amount of mercury impairments and water bodies around the Minnesota, it is quite large. There's very little that can kind of be done with that. And then also, it is recently been put on the list for fish and macroinvertebrate biomass, which is just stating that the native fish and macroinvertebrate species in the lake is not up to kind of standards as what they would hope it to be. Although at times it's hard to know with that going forward. They do assessment every 10 years of what with stocking of lakes is harder to tell, and every year is different. So if you're monitoring out for 1 year and they're using their fish nets and they're shocking, they're trying to catch things, it's a little hard to know that an exact standard. That is not my area of expertise again. But yes, Diamond Lake is impaired for 3 actions and all have improving trend lines. This is one more question. Would you be willing to take any action to install best management practices on your land to minimize the impacts for the long-term care of water quality? It was the one that, again, is really hard to say, give a yes or no answer. It's not really a trick question, because the number of BMPs and such variation of practices of what can be done on a land landscape is extremely large. It is quite large. Anything from just like, I'm going to let my my lawn, reach a little bit longer. I'm going to mow it a little bit less, or I will mow and not have my clippings blowing into the lake or street, to something as large as putting in a rain garden, or depending on what land you have, restoring wetlands or something. So it's not really, there is no right or wrong answer on there, but I really liked how the yeses were about 3 times as much as the no's, even though there's no given response for what the practice would be. And even more, the maybes, or depends on what practice it would be here in yellow, are actually more than the no's too. So that is very good area to see. I really like to see that. Nest Lake, again, they had a little bit higher, which is not a big deal, but the amount of maybes or depends for Diamond Lakes was greatly much bigger for Nest Lake. So, and again, there is a very wide range of practices for best manager practice, so this was kind of a hard hard one to scale on. How long have you been using the lakes or rivers for recreation? This was the question asked. You can see there were quite a large amount of many of the years where it's up pretty high. The average here is about 41 years. This question might be skewed a little bit because I feel like some people that answered it kind of put in for how long they were also living in the area or what they're using for the lakes or rivers for. But this shows in the area around here that people do really appreciate the abilities for the recreation that water has in the area, whether it be for fishing, for boating, for water skiing, just for relaxing in, just for peace and quiet, and you don't even know how to swim. People have been looking and using the lakes and rivers around it for quite a long time. The average is pretty high, and we like to see that, and that is great. And we hope that this continues and grows as the education with individuals can increase. Hopefully the water quality can increase at the same time with the amount of recreation being used. So it was a very positive change that we saw there. Are you aware of how a lake's water quality, such as the quality of the chemistry, the appearance, the biological significance, etc., can affect a lake's property value? Again, most people said yes. Its property value on lakeshore is more attached to the landscape than property value just in an open field. It should be known most properties on water have an increase with them, and it is known that protection of the water bodies around the area is in best interest of the owners for the value of its worth. There is where I live, I don't live in the area. There's a lake north of me of Little Rock Lake near Rice, Minnesota on Highway 10. Don't know if anybody's been there. It is in the top 1% of impaired lakes in the state for nutrients and algae. At times in the summertime, it is so pea soup green. You could stick your fingers in there, not get your knuckles wet, and you probably can't even see your fingertips. It is green. Now, the property value of that lake has diminished, and there's many stories of people around, they'll buy a house in the wintertime, be like, oh, I cannot wait for the summertime. I own a lakeshore house. I'm just going to be using this all the time, be fishing and swimming. I'm going to invite everybody up. The snow will melt coming to midsummer, and they're like, what did I get myself into? And so the lakeshore property can be greatly affected by the water quality of the lake. This should be a very big noticeable change. Question number 9, do you know where the water enters and exits your lake? Again, good amount of people said yes. It was about 25% we'll say about people that said no, they do not have an understanding of where the water enters and exits your lake. That is just fine. That is something I never really dove into, not much, or ever really had much of a thought of before I got myself in education and got into the conservation business. But it is important to know for curiosity and just to help, I guess, be your eyes and ears. And so if you see something and are aware of it, you may know. And just the knowledge itself can help with it. And so with all the properties in an average of about 19 years of responders living on the lake, the combined knowledge of everybody for the observation of hydrology is valuable information, and helping to share that information for long-term planning and education use for projects can greatly save us a lot of time and can improve the amount of projects that can help have a positive effect on the water quality. And in case I can actually go up and show, I'm just going to go back and see what it's showing on that map. So here is Diamond Lake, and there are pretty much 4 main areas where water is entering into the lake. Obviously, the Hubbard Shultz Wheeler chain of lakes is a very large, important area. This year is exiting to branch 6 of the county ditch number 28. We have one large area. There's not names at the moment for these areas. Down south, another one on more of the southwest, and one's right west by the park. And so these are pretty much the 4 main areas where water is entering into the lake. There are a couple other smaller ones. There are probably many other little small ephemeral streams or little ditches that may flow in at some time when it's raining. People living around there, they know the area, but these are the main areas where they flow. Water flows into the lake. See the exiting of the lake right here into branch 6 of County Ditch 28. And then knowing again where these all areas reside, again, as you can see, is the land use of them is pretty much dominated by production crops in hay pasture. Going back to the survey. This is question 10. Again, not quite maybe the most trick question on here, but again, there's no right or wrong answer. What do you think are the most important lake-related actions for water quality advocacy? And it was supposed to be rated a 1 through 5. So obviously, with 5 being the best. So septic system management. I know Diamond Lake had gone through a while a deal. There is sewer access on the lake, although for other lakes, septic system management it is very important. Shoreline management is pretty dominant, no matter the landscape or how or what the land is being used for, just because it is the most immediate area connected to the water. And even though it might not change the water quality, the ecosystem of the shoreline has the biggest impact. So you might not get, a bunch of fields of, say, potatoes on a really steep grade hill and everything's eroding into the water. It will give a negative balance for nutrients and pollutants going to the lake. But as far as the ecosystem services on the shoreline, it won't change it as much as having the shoreline natural. Agricultural best management practices is a non-point source of runoff, which is always changing, very weather dependent, very dependent on what's going on every year, and so on. Forest protection and stewardship is extremely important. There are some areas around the lake where there are a good amount of healthy forests, and we hope they stay and continue to grow over time to help to cool down the water and keep the land cold, and also to keep the soil in place and percolation of water through there. Aquatic Invasive Species management is something that's always on top of everybody's mind. I heard it would be horrible if starry stormwort came to the lake. I share that same attitude. That is something no one wants around. The education, I feel like, for this has been growing quite a bit in the last 10 plus years, and will continue to grow. And hopefully education bringing on to the next generation will kind of help curtail some of these damages that they're bringing to lakes. I didn't really have much of a general conclusion with this survey, but we really wanted to kind of get an idea of what the attitudes and awareness of people were and how long they've lived in there. And it actually was surprising to people. We've shared this with other partners outside the areas and other organizations, and they were excited to learn of what's going on. And really the average time that people have spent on the lake or in a lake association, to me is very positive news, and we all hope continues that way. And continues to improve on the lake of the water. It can take a very long time for the residents' time of water, a raindrop getting in that body until it actually leaves. I'm not 100% certain on the residents' time of Diamond Lake. Some lakes like, Green Lake, maybe a little more like 7 years. And I was at a Lake Association meeting the other weekend with George Lake, and their lake is actually 20 years. So for raindrop falls, pretty much gets into the water body of George Lake, it will be there for about 20 years before it influences out, which is a pretty long time. So there's a long-term benefit to educate and have small improvements and just to keep our eyes and ears out there. So I didn't know going forward, that was the last question from the survey we got and the little education that was mailed out. If anybody had any questions with the survey or ideas, or if anybody would like to have any questions with the subwatershed around Diamond Lake and any ideas. It's pretty much been about 2 hours, so that's quite a long presentation time. So,
Andy, I have one
yeah.
comment and question, and I appreciate everyone staying on this long that stayed on. But so one of the things I've seen or heard in the last year from the Lakeshore, being on the Lakeshore Association, is a growing demand or interest on the part of the residents here to do more than we have to improve the quality of the water. I think one of the key responsibilities of a Lakeshore Association is to direct that interest in a way that's likely to produce positive outcomes. And, everybody's got their, magic wand idea of how to do it, and it's based on not a lot of information. So with that in mind, if the two of you were in charge of the world and we came to you and said, we want to do more, what can we do that's going to be effective? What's your top 1 or 2 areas that we ought to focus our increased attention on?
One of the things that is important for us as human beings to think about, when we think about water quality, we think about, oh, let's get in the lake and clean up the water. But we're terrestrial beings, so what we do on the land impacts the water. And I think that's every time I work with elementary school children or adults, I really emphasize that we are terrestrial creatures. What we do on the land impacts the water. So how we interact with our yards and our surrounding areas is going to have the biggest impact of the water versus how we're behaving necessarily in the water. So things like, having some native vegetation, thinking like just having a runoff mindset, having an idea of where your water is moving, how it's moving in your on your yard is a very big step towards having an improvement there. Because then you just start realizing, oh, well, my driveway where I change my oil, this is an area that, if I have a little oil spill there, that's going right into the lake there. And, just having that mindset, knowing where water travels, just gives people a new perspective on how they manage their areas and their lawns. That would be one thing that would be a good first step. Once you understand that, you can take it further and start, reintroducing vegetation. And, I think that's probably the second thing that'll, is the biggest has the biggest capacity for improvement, is using vegetation to your advantage versus disadvantage. So, I have some lawn. I love having some lawn, but at the same time, I think 75, if not more, of my way more than that, on my property is woods and unmanicured area. It's wild area. So, and I like it that way because I appreciate the functions that the natural environment provide for our earth and our everything. So I'm really appreciating native vegetation, even though sometimes it's not the prettiest and it can look a little scraggly. Understanding that that does have a value in itself, you know. So I think those would be the two things that I would probably promote the most: that watershed mindset and valuing vegetation.
That's good.
Thank you.
I've been asked this question before, and I've heard other people, you know, been asked this question, like if you had the magic wand. And I guess first it's like not really to try to convince someone that they're doing something wrong. You know, we're all owners. I own a house. You know, we all have actions we take. It doesn't, unless you know it is there, you don't, it's kind of hard for us to like hammer and be like, you're doing something wrong, because it's just kind of everybody's following a norm. But there is something what we want, you know, like, you know, you want a phosphorus sink, you don't want a source. You know, maybe some people want a swimming lake versus some people want like a fishing lake. You know, there's kind of differences of what you want. Maybe want people put a lot of focus into their lawns and not as much in their lake. I do know one thing I've seen is, you know, you can kind of go in on the county's GIS website and look up every person's property, you know, and you can see their taxes, whether you like it or not, as public information. And you can see how much someone pays in a year to go into the watershed district, whether it be a management plan that the lake is, you know, has a working project for. And I also see, you know, so say maybe the average person on their taxes will spend $50 a year into the watershed district, and the same towards projects being assessed for going towards the lake quality. And at the same time, how much over $50 a year is someone spending to maintain something that is the norm, but is kind of having a negative benefit towards the lake, you know, time and energy for some practice on their landscape that might have a negative impact that most people don't really realize what may be going on. Just because most people here, I'm thinking, are lakeshore owners, it is true. Your immediate property right there is the first line of defense for impacting the lake and its water quality. And not having additional impacts of nutrients going to lake, i.e. fertilizers or insecticides or herbicides going to lake, is important just because of the immediate zone area you are next to it. So yeah, it's hard not, you know, trying to like measure forward, you know, beating the dead horse, or just kind of keep on with the same attitudes that someone's doing something wrong. But there's small changes that you can do over time and get used to things, or just try something new to try to minimize the amount of impact with debris, leaves, lawn clippings, you know, additional extra nutrients or fertilizer, herbicides that to me aren't really necessary for the ecosystem that in the area we live in, but maybe they're more necessary for the plants, that specific species that we have growing there. So there's different things as far as the vegetation, that the more natural vegetation is, the more natural and pristine a water body will be. They kind of just go hand in hand, but it depends what, not everybody's landscape and area are able to control things like that, and not everybody wants things like that. And maybe even being looked at it in the neighborhood or the area they live is, there's a certain standard that they may be thought that they're held by, of, you know, my area should look pristine. I shouldn't have, you know, one dandelion growing there, and I got to have like perfectly mowed, you know, 2-inch grass or whatnot. Certain things are just a mindset over time that are hard to change, but small changes over time make the difference. Showing even the graphs John showed, the samples, you know, they may not be the greatest. Hey, over 15 years, we've had turn this lake around in the best water quality, but small changes over time will make that difference. So education is, to me, you're really, if you don't know, you don't know. So education is important. Also, education is probably the hardest to get out there for people because it's all voluntary. So
yeah, on that, you know, sort of what you don't know, you know, like the things that you don't even know that you didn't know. And And those are the things that really get you. And with that, we do have what's it's called the Shoreline Handbook. I believe we've distributed copies, but we do have it in a digital format too. I'd be happy to provide that for you, Tim, and you guys can send that out. That's also been pulled for different newsletters and stuff by other lake associations and whatnot. But that has everything that we've talked about and more, and even things like just the consideration, and this probably has a bigger impact on Diamond, being the littoral area is pretty large, and you have a shallower lake in areas, going out a little ways before you hammer down on the motor, because that water turning and that velocity, that does turn up sediments, and once those sediments are suspended, then they're available for algae and whatnot. So things like that you may people may not even think about. I get off and I hammer down and I take off. Well, maybe idling out into a little deeper water before you really rev up the engine. Stuff like that are in there that are the things that you maybe didn't even know you didn't know. So
Yep. I'd say the first thing would be education and then action. Get to learn and then get to know. Diamond Lake is different. Like I say, I don't want to say hammering people are doing something wrong or there's not being something done right, but their education is big and awareness. And with Diamond Lake having the county park right there, I think on the website they listed they have like 80 cemented units for camping sites. Maybe the Lake Association having to try to increase a little bit more educational awareness at the park area, just via signs or programs or something there, might help for the people that come in and use the lake, but necessarily don't have the long-term, care as everybody that's listening right now does have for it, because you have, the personal care for it and pride living on the lake versus someone that might just be here for the 4th of July weekend. They got a camper, a cooler of beer. They're just going to hammer on the lake, fish as much as they can, and just kind of leave it there. So possibly, if there's something towards maybe more education awareness near the park, that might be something to look into too.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions, even maybe not related to Diamond Lake, or just concepts in general? Since we're on, also we will be stopping this decently soon, and the recorded video, which if it goes right, should be put on our YouTube page for everybody to look at. And then again, people could always call into the district, see if we're around for phone calls, or try returning calls for any other questions. So
Well, thank you very much, Andy and John. I think this has been extremely helpful.
okay.
good to hear. Yep, and we're just down the road, so don't be a stranger, and we'd be happy to work with you guys again in the future.
Okay.
All right.
All right, Andy, nice job.
Thanks, John. Thanks for everybody for joining in. We hope to have not only sometimes.
All right, good night, everybody.